I think a person needs to talk to God. They have to have open communication with God in your life. And if you don't, it's hard to say that the person's going to have any spirituality outside of things like drug use or whatever, because I think the essence of that spiritual experience is a relationship with the divine. And that is ultimately what spirituality is. And the more we open ourselves up to that and we're vulnerable with God and open with Him, I think the more spiritual person will feel throughout their day.
Welcome to the Set and Setting podcast with Madison Margolin. As a journalist, Madison has spent years exploring the intersection of psychedelics, cannabis, and culture. This podcast brings together thought leaders from today's psychedelic renaissance to talk about the role of psychedelics in our inner and outer lives. You can support this podcast and find additional resources at BeHereNowNetwork.com/Madison.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Set and Setting podcast. Our guest today is Moshe Reuven Sheradsky, known professionally as Moshe Reuven. He's an Hasidic Billboard charting music artist and Forbes 30 Under 30 entrepreneur. Subsequently known as a rabbi, singer, rapper, songwriter, writer, entrepreneur, executive, and public speaker. He first received recognition in music when his debut single went viral on several social media and streaming platforms. Following the release of his debut, You Are Not Alone, he signed to Create Music Group. The single managed to reach charts in 5 different countries, including becoming a Billboard certified single in the US. He later collaborated with Julian Marley. In August 2022, Rolling Stone included Moshe in their Global Artist Spotlight list for 2022. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I'm excited to get into it.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited as well.
So, I just want to start, you don't hear every day about, like Hasidic rock stars, making Rolling Stone charts and all of this. So, I wanted to ask you, what's your background? How did you get into music? How did religion come into play with it? I know it's a big question, but let's try to boil it down if we can.
Yeah, no, definitely a big question. But in short, basically, I mean, like the rest of us, always a big music enthusiast from birth, basically. And music ran culture in a lot of regards. Where I grew up, it's like what people, where the people get their. It's one of the biggest cultural thrusts in America, definitely, and it impacts every part of a person's life in society, amongst friends, amongst social circles and whatnot, especially when you're young. I probably, started when I was like 8. I wrote something like more like a poem type of thing, and it was more like a personal thing. I don't know how serious it was, but I really, right away I realized that I enjoyed the creativity aspect of it and how you could include yourself in song and, wordplay and stuff like that. But it was just very, something like a child would do, type of thing. And as the years gone on, more basketball and those things were my obsession as a young kid. And that was our family sport, but that became less of my priority. And, at some point as a teenager, I started writing a lot, writing a lot of songs, writing a lot of, different ways of expressing myself, or even just frivolous things, talking about what me and my friends are up to this past weekend or whatever. And, that was like a starting ground for me. My friends and I were big, hip hop heads. And, for me, I over the years, I grew an appreciation for all types of music. And even before, I was, being a kid from Cooper City, Florida, you're not necessarily entrenched in the rap game, but it was, I had a wide, eclectic, diverse background in what I was exposed to musically. And when it became a thing amongst my friends that we would like kind of like host freestyle sessions, just more jokingly, like sit like not as a serious thing. It was more like as playful, cracking jokes about each other or whatever it might be about life, and just it was like something that we did more recreationally. But more and more, I had people that would be a part of that, or that it would be shared to, saying things to me like, "Wow, you have a certain talent with this. Like, this is like serious. Like, we're all just messing around, but you're not. You're not. You don't play any games. This is really a serious thing." And because it was like I would use that as like self-expression. And one of my close friends, Landon, and I would send things back to each other, like songs that we wrote, or like freestyle things back to each other while we were had downtime in class while we were in school, or watching a movie on whales or something. And that just became something that I would continuously do to express myself in my downtime, almost like a journal. And that's how it started.
And how did that sort of coexist along your own kind of religious and spiritual path?
So I was like, in my years, I got really involved in like party life, and I was really like deeply focusing. I was really entrenched in like the social aspect of being a teenager and the parties and all those things. And that like didn't necessarily lead me down the most simple path as a teenager. And the fact that causes that for me, my tool of expression was this form of music and songwriting, that the two blended together, because I was expressing things that I was going through, or things I was thinking about life in the world, through what I was just writing nonsense about maybe yesterday, or it could have been something serious as well. But the fact that my life became more serious and there was more deep ideas that I had to think about throughout as a teenager than the norm, that was also the way that it was being digested, was through writing it through what I called, in hindsight, kind of like my journal.
Mm. So how, oftentimes I'll ask people like, or people who are doing kind of awesome things in the world and really just very self-actualized, which I see you as, what is it that enables you to be that way? Right. So does that question make sense? It's like, what are
No,
you?
it makes
Yeah.
sense. But the reason I made that face is I'm thinking like, okay, how do I make this a short answer? I mean, because
You can
there's like
do a long answer too.
several elements of it for me. I mean, and like if you have struggles early on in your life, or you put yourself in scenarios that aren't the best, obviously they're not the best, but sometimes that leads you to think more deeply about life than your surroundings. And that's essentially what happened to me, like I had a near-death experience when I was like 16, and one of the main things I thought about was like, what was I here for? I just like had a good time and peace out, like, is that like, that's just it? That's my life, like 16 years old, and over some nonsense, that's how this plays out. And it was like a clear thing to me that like one of the things that was like thrusting me back into like reality was like that I had to live, that I have to live this life, is like that there's a purpose, there's a reason for why I'm here. It's not, all the fun times, all those things. Yeah, you always say like you have those memories and stuff, but like, you know, a good time is a fleeting experience. It goes away, and what you're left with nothing. Whereas life is more than just a good time. It's a there's a mission that a person sent down into the world for, and that was like a real thing. I was like, I have to be here. I have to achieve. I can't go today. Like I have to do all the things I'm here to do. And that feeling that I had it stuck with me. Obviously as the years go on, it's almost like further from Sinai. You're a little further from the experience, but that one experience was like a real wake up call for me, that I'm like, my life has to be meaningful. I have to do what I'm here to do. I can't just let things that were important to me just go to waste and not be what they could be. My life has to be real, and it matters. So that's like the entry answer to everything. There's more levels to it for me, and especially as like my journey led to becoming more spiritually involved with, more deeply entrenched in my relationship with God, and my Yiddishkeit, like those aspects nurture that, because there's so much meaning in Judaism. There's so much meaning in a relationship with God, and that just made it more and more serious that your talents, your opportunities, time is all with a purpose, and we have to utilize it right. And that's the gist of the answer, I guess.
So, oftentimes, so near-death experiences, you could say, is something akin to a psychedelic experience. And the reason I say that is because people often say that there are kind of like death motifs in psychedelic experience, right? Like you have this, sometimes you might have an experience of ego dissolution or ego death, as they call it, and kind of identifying with something beyond the body. And then the question is like, what do you do with that awareness, right? And whether that awareness comes from, from, God forbid, a physical thing that's actually threatening your life, or, a psychedelic trip or whatever, so how did you kind of integrate that near-death experience? And how did that, what did life look like afterward? Like, how did it motivate you? And you also talked about your relationship to God. Like, how did that evolve?
Yeah. So, just like you're saying with drugs, for example, like a drug experience, usually a person, we get brought up with like our walls of like reality, like things are a certain way, and however that makes you feel, that's your reality. It doesn't matter. And part of our, it's part of why people are driven towards things like drugs, or it could, whether something that usually form a very negative relationship with drugs, especially where a person becomes an addict and whatnot, that they're trying to escape these walls that were built up in the person. And, because drugs kind of do that. A drug, and that's what you're saying with the spiritual experience that people talk about with drugs, is that when they're taking it, they feel like they're being left beyond those realms of those walls that they were born and brought up to. And that kind of left them with the cards of however they feel about it, that they might want to escape that. And it does that experience. For me, that near-death experience is a bit of, taking myself beyond the walls. And, because if a person grows up a certain way, is taught a certain way, society guides them a certain way, there's no reason for things to change unless something happens. And definitely this brought me throughout beyond those walls and put me in a place of like, I have to readjust my sails. I have to like think the direction, the focus of my life is not the right focus. And, I think, you know, that doesn't necessarily need to be achieved with drugs or near death experience. A person could, whether it's through inspiration or teachings or, people that are wiser than them, or, for me, it's in my Judaism, like the things that I learned, that you could be on a higher perspective, seeing the things that you're doing, and finding a way to get closer to what the goal should be. Definitely anything that snaps a person out of walls and reality that's not so good, it might give them a chance to readjust themselves, whether that's just a life experience or something else. I think for me, the thing that changed it was like that it was rooted in a relationship with God, that there was I knew that there was something higher that formed me in life. And I knew that that wasn't coming from me. It was from ultimately from God, that God was guiding certain things. And I started seeing that God was guiding certain aspects of my life. And, wanting that relationship with him and to walk that path of like whatever it is my purpose is like that helped me to find where the goals should be, where the focus should be. And it's helped me to be inspired to do the things that I've done and like work to be as impactful and as successful at something or whatever it may be, like that I could be. Every single thing became important, whereas before it was all just whatever.
So in your music, how do you draw inspiration?
So yeah, definitely like what I learned in Hasidism and Kabbalah, those are things that could drive inspiration for me. Life is a huge inspiration. Like the Baal Shem says, everything a person sees and experiences is some form of a directive in their life for them to live more meaningful, for them to have more of an impact, and figure out what they're here to do in life. And so life, Torah, relationships, and just that journey with God, that a person walks the ups and downs of it, and that we all experience that in our own ways.
Mm-hmm. So for the audience, just in case they don't know, so the Baal Shem Tov was the sort of founder of the Hasidic movement. The Hasidic movement is something of like Bhakti for Judaism, to kind of like switch around all of the cultural terms. It's kind of devotional, ecstatic Judaism, which today I'd say looks a lot different than when it was founded. And maybe we can get into that a little bit. But the roots of like I would say like Baal Shem Tov Hasidus is obviously much different than all of the types of Hasidus that we have today. And people, who live in Brooklyn might, be familiar with the different neighborhoods where you have, in Williamsburg, one section, like, Satmar and Crown Heights, Lubavitch. This is all very esoteric, I know, to a non-Jewish audience. So, can we sort of, for the audience who's not Jewish, kind of describe like when you talk about Hasidus and Kabbalah, like as points of inspiration, like what are you actually referring to?
Yeah. So, as a Jew, we study the Torah and the Bible, or what others might refer to as the Old Testament. And in it, there's myriads of like hidden secrets and gems that that connect to various aspects of life and a person and the way that the world works. And that's why Kabbalah is literally referred to as like the secrets of the Torah. And Hasidus includes Kabbalah in all aspects of the Torah, all levels of it, which there's multiple levels of it, and that are less esoteric. And basically the within these different secrets, there's life wisdom. There's different things that you can understand about yourself, about the way relationships work, the way that people work, what drives them, what drives you. Uncover different aspects of your personal experiences, and it's really just for layman's terms, like Jewish mysticism. Basically, it's the mystical aspects of what we learn, which used to be hidden away for the elite few in the past, and now it's widely accessible.
So you talk about, certain wisdom and secrets, and is there anything in particular, any examples that you found to be, most resonant or useful on your own journey?
Tons. That's every day learning more. A big one that it's almost like in the Jewish world, we just see it as like a simple teaching now because it's like so mainstream, these thoughts. But like, the concept that wherever you are is divinely ordained by God, that you're in that specific place. Whoever you meet, our communication right now is divinely ordained, that we're brought to speak on this podcast because there's some form of like a, spiritual potential to it of what could be achieved for the greater good of humanity. That God guides the footsteps of man, and wherever that those footsteps are, there's God's right there too. So I think that's a very practical one that we sometimes just say, oh, that's a common Hasidic idea, but it's like literally there's a reason why we always talk about it, because it's literally a life-changing one.
And how, I've obviously I know that one too. And sometimes I really like to hold it close. And then other times I say to myself, like, is this just like a cop out? Like, is this kind of like an excuse for why things are going the way they are? And I'm just like telling myself this, that it's like the way God wants it. And it's just like, how can we maintain that because God wants it a certain way, it must be for the good, right? And so obviously that takes a level of, the word in Hebrew, I guess would be bitachon, like in trust in like God's goodness. But how can we really just know that and feel that okay, so yeah, this is divinely ordained, but like, why does that mean it's for the, why does that mean it's in my best interest? And then the argument could be made, okay, well, God always has your best interest at heart. And then, someone might say, and I'm going through all like the different sorts of like, mind games that we play with ourselves, is okay, well, it doesn't feel that way, right? Or how can we get aligned with it in order, to feel good in the program that God has for us?
Yeah. So that's a struggle. I mean, one aspect is that there is an element of this thing where the way that a person wants to go, God lets them go. So there is aspect of, for example, as a religious Jewish male, there's certain places that I'm not supposed to walk into or go. For a very like practical example, I can't go into a non-kosher restaurant because it might lead someone to think that maybe the food there is kosher. It's called Marasayan. But if I really want to, I'll definitely go there. God gives us free choice. It'll be preordained by God that somehow I did that, and that I'm there. And there's something that I'm supposed to do there, but I shouldn't be in the first place going that direction. I made that out of my own volition, since God helps a person on the way that they want to go. Chas v'shalom, I didn't necessarily choose the right one in that point because I'm not supposed to. And there's definitely something there. So there's something to it on different ends. So that was like more of the first part of what your question, that is it just because God brought me here? Is this something that I'm supposed to access? Is this something I'm supposed to be a part of? Is this the right thing? Just because God showed me this thing, is this something that's good for me? Is it something that's bad for me? Because certain aspects, like the fact that, it says that God creates the world with tov and ra, good and evil. There's different aspects of the world that's made up of, and it's true that even good things have ra. It's since the beginning of time, basically. But ultimately, some things that a person has presented them is ra. It's evil. It's like it's preordained that thing's presented to them. But it's also, but what's the purpose there? What's the thing that I'm supposed to do? It doesn't mean that I need to engage with it. Perhaps the one thing that is meant to be with this form of evil being brought in front of me is for me to turn away from it. That by not being engaged with those things that are not good, from an objective standpoint, not good for, maybe it could even be for my health, not good. By turning away from it, I offset the balance of good and for the better in the world, and I bring down light into the world where I could have been involved in something that was very negative for me and very negative in the world, and I chose not to. So not always does it mean that just because I'm there that I have to I have to be involved in that, whatever that might be. So I think that's one element. Then as far as like the acceptance of, well, God brought me here, and now that I'm here, there's obviously something that God wants me to do here. And whether I like this experience or not, it's God that made this a situation. Well, I mean, there's elements in Judaism that are called Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim, where a person has to accept upon themselves that God's kingship. So if God has it, that this person's responsibility is to deal with this mess or deal with this thing, and they know that that's their thing and that's their responsibility, it might not be pleasant, and that you might not feel it, right? But that's part of like having that yoke of God's kingship on the world, that you're gonna do what needs to be done in that area, and then as far as like if it's something negative that the person's experiencing, there's different elements there too, like that God could be testing the person to show them whether they're holding spiritually where they should be, that if they fail, that they'll obviously recognize that there's certain areas where they're lacking and they need to work on that, and that if they succeed, they'll get closer to a close relationship with their essence of who they are, with God and what he aspires for the person in his life. And so and that's sometimes, the negative things are sometimes very negative, and obviously I mean, not obviously, but we try to believe that everything's positive and everything's good, and we're supposed to be besimcha, we're supposed to be happy all the time. So that's the hard work. That's the work that we have to do. And it's not, especially in the more difficult situations, it's more difficult, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like part of the psychedelic path is kind of asking these questions. And I always wonder is, for those of us who believe in God or have a relationship with God, like even that engagement with the divine is kind of feels psychedelic, right? And so we chatted about this a little bit before we started recording, but I want to ask you, like, why do you think psychedelics can be such a spiritual experience from a Jewish perspective?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, not everyone that's listening might not like my answers. I'm just the messenger. I didn't make these things up. But ultimately, not all of it's so lovey-dovey for the person that's a user of it. I mean, Reb Nachman, I'm a Hasid of the Rebbe, I'm a Chabadnik, but Reb Nachman is Breslov, and I love hearing certain ideas from him. And one of the things that he said is that the light that's found in drugs is a form of like stolen light, which means that like it is light. There's light in the world that the person's accessing. But they didn't do it through their avoda. They didn't do it through working on themselves or trying to get there, which a person could get to that experience through hard work and toil, which is not fun for anyone. No one likes to work. But, we could be spiritually uplifted if we work towards it and if we try to do it every day. But, a person could just take that light just by taking a drug. And I mean, the concept of it being stolen is just like, it's not an access for, in Judaism, we try not to necessarily access those things that way, like the halachically, and most people will say most hardcore drugs are, not something that we're supposed to access, although there is light there. It is meaning that there is a spiritual energy. That's a separate thing. Whether it's best for me to be involved in it, it's a separate thing. But a person doing drugs will definitely have a spiritual experience, and there's a reason why people gravitate to it, because ultimately, there's an impact. There's something that they're experiencing. But yeah, I mean, the Jewish perspective on it is to create that spiritual experience what Judaism was said would be the right way was through working on themselves spiritually and not being involved in certain things spiritually and trying to access a relationship with God, being more deeply entrenched in prayer and doing good deeds or mitzvahs, and the more kadosh, more holy, the more sanctified the person could make themselves or channel their life, the more they'll experience it in their lives. And the deeper the relationship the person has, when I can say for myself, the greatest highs I've ever had were through a relationship with God, and I spiritually you could tap into certain things and feel that in your day-to-day life, but it doesn't, those things, sometimes it's a gift, initially, because when a person tries, God wants the person to be able to access it, but ultimately, most of the time it's work, and it's being involved properly with your Judaism and keeping yourself on the straight and narrow spiritually. And that's all hard, but it's really rewarding, because whereas a high, you have to access a drug and it's only going to be fleeting. When you spiritually are tuned in, it could be infinitely there, and you could always be living on that plane.
What about, using it for as a medicine?
Yeah. So there's definitely room for discussion on that. There's rabbis that say that it's, that there's even rabbis that say marijuana is okay, so but it would just basically be like person should discuss with their rabbinic authority, the local Orthodox Rav or rabbinic authority on the matter. I saw a letter where the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was asked about this, and he says basically he's not so knowledgeable about the drug. It was a new thing at the time, and kind of basically saying that the person should search all the means that they can, and if that happens, obviously he didn't necessarily say if that happens to be the doctor's prescription, but I'm sure there's certain areas, if your rabbinic authority suggests that that's the doctor prescription for that specific thing, and nothing else is better, for sure, there might be room for it. But it's definitely something that's like, I'm not the person to paskin on because it's rabbinic authority, but there is room to say that certain drugs that people use recreationally definitely have a medical usage, and where there's room to, and there's a rabbi and doctor suggesting it, absolutely. It just depends.
I guess what I would argue is not argue, but first of all,
you could argue.
It's just such a heated topic, and I do believe that I remember the first time I did mushrooms, I was sad at the end of the trip, because I had a beautiful trip. It was amazing. It was, totally mystical and whatever, but I was sad at the end, because I was like, I want to not need mushrooms in order to feel this way. I want to be able to do it on my own. And that's something, we're on the Be Here Now network, and it's based off the teachings of Ram Dass. And Ram Dass also, when he went to India and was with his guru, a lot of it was because he had been up and down so many times on the psychedelic merry-go-round that he wanted to find a way to spiritually sustain himself. And he actually gave acid to his guru, and his guru said it's good medicine. I think he called it the yogi medicine. He's and the guru was very into Christ, actually. He said it'll take you into the room with Christ, but you can't stay. And so the way that I see it is and we're in a moment right now where a lot of people from religious backgrounds are doing psychedelics and exploring themselves, both for mental health and spirituality and fun and whatever it is. And it kind of shows you the path, but it's you still have to do the work of walking the path yourself. The drugs are not going to do it for you. They're just going to maybe illuminate it for you. And then, yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, I didn't know.
Oh no, that was basically the idea. And I guess the last thing is just that we do have precedent, even in Jewish culture, or history of using psychoactive compounds, plants, whatever, in the context of spiritual experience. So it's, I think you're answering the question correctly, and so is the Lubavitcher Rebbe and everyone else who's been asked this question answering. But I think it comes down to really what is the intention with which one is engaging with these substances and with this quote unquote stolen light,
Yeah. I mean, that is a big one. I mean, most people I think they don't have like bad intentions. A lot of them, a lot of people, it's like, especially if they're active users of certain things, they, like you said, they experience something and, something's there. But I do see what you're saying, and that's kind of connects to what I was mentioning before, like that, you always come down and realize like that's how people get addicted, because they have to keep trying to access that. Whereas like if they spiritually get there themselves without the drugs, then they could always like, they don't have the need to keep trying to plug into, it's like, but yeah, I mean that, that's just like a practical way that I try to think about it, but I definitely see what you're saying. Like these, people are trying to tap into something, they're trying to connect to something higher, especially us Jews. It says that the Pintele Yid wants to connect. That it wants. That's a Jew's life is to. We're so entrenched in Torah study and all these things, and God this, God that. It's like so much part of our lives from the day we wake up, from the moment we wake up till we go to sleep. There's things that a Jew could be doing. That's the Torah saying that this is ways to connect. And I think we feel it very strongly, this need to connect, and so the question, I think the question is like, obviously, like when we feel that need, for me, when I feel that need, am I doing the right things day to day to, this is just pretty personally, am I doing the right things day to day to be creating that feeling? And if I'm not, then, I'm not seeking out a drug, I'm seeking out a way to regather myself, speak to a mentor, a spiritual mentor of sorts, to help me to figure out how I could realign myself. What do I need to be doing differently? What am I doing wrong? What am I not doing that's right? And that, it doesn't have to be drastic things. My rabbi would always say to me, like, spiritual growth for a person is, what is the one thing that I'm doing that I should stop doing? And what is the one thing that I should be doing that I'm not doing? And if a person just uses that barometer continuously, spiritually, you'll grow. Whereas all the things I was saying before, you have to think about this giant spiritual journey to feel that connection consistently. Most people are going to be like, oh, that's a lot of work,
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's sort of like Ram Dass's own path. And, I'd say all people, Jew, non-Jew, whatever, have, it's like, it's almost like like we're, like we all need to eat, right? We all want, like, there's all these like human urges, right? And I think spiritual connection is one of those human instincts. In fact, the research of Rick Strassman, who studied DMT and has looked at the DMT brain state and compared it to the prophetic brain state as described in the Torah. A lot of his research points to like a very innate and unique human capacity to engage with, communicate with the divine. So taking that, my question for you is, give me an example, what's a practice that you have in particular that makes you feel connected, that like really is it for you, that, that maybe some of the people listening to this podcast can learn from or absorb or maybe practice on their own in their own way or whatever it is.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I didn't mean to say it was an exclusively Jewish thing. I wasn't saying that at all. It's definitely the human. Like we all have souls, and a soul is a part of God. So God, part of God wants to be entrenched in God. Part of God wants to be, if every single person, Jew or non-Jew, has a part of God in them, they're going to want some spirituality and to feed themselves, like you're saying. So as far as for me, the biggest thing that has kept me going, I think, before I had this connection through Judaism, and it was just like a spiritual thing because I'd offset my life and I was just having more of a spiritual experience. It wasn't necessarily Jewish from my perspective, was prayer, like having, I think one of the deepest ways to connect to God, and connecting to God, God's the highest of highs. So you want to connect, you want to get higher, the deeper you're connecting to God, the higher that spiritual experience is. And being able to express myself fully in my relationship with God, to God, and talk about my experiences with him, speak to him. Breslov people are very into this whole thing, like Hasidus, like where they go out into the woods and talk to God for an hour. You need to be talking to God for at least an hour a day. And, I honestly, Breslov or not, I think, or Jewish or not, I think a person needs to talk to God. They have to have open communication with God in your life. And if you don't, it's hard to say that the person's going to have any spirituality outside of things like drug use or whatever, because I think the essence of that spiritual experience is a relationship with the divine. And that is ultimately what spirituality is. And the more we open ourselves up to that, and we're vulnerable with God and open with him, I think the more spiritual person will feel throughout their day. And literally starting my day every day, it's not just a Jewish thing that we do. Like, to start my day with prayer, it actually does change my entire day. And I can tell you the days that I didn't feel super connected, I didn't learn the best when I did get to learn, or I didn't even learn at all because I was so plugged into the world. Maybe that day I didn't spend enough time or spend enough focus on my prayer, because I really realized that, like, even, much later on in the game, beyond when I was just like trying to figure things out spiritually, and prayer was a thing, is, where I'm at today, the engine fuel for everything else that I do spiritually is is in my prayer. Like, if my prayer is lacking, if my prayers are lacking, then I'm not going to feel able throughout the day spiritually inspired. And we call it avodas sholev, like that. It's the work of the heart to pray, and having that heart open to something divine from from the beginning of your day onwards. It starts with praying from the time you wake up. That's my thoughts on it, personally, for me.
Any advice for someone who maybe doesn't have a practice of prayer, or is still figuring out like what it even means to pray? Any tips?
Yeah, I mean, there's two. You could probably put it in two categories, because there's people that maybe not even believe in God, or they don't feel comfortable speaking to God, so to speak. There's people that do believe in God, or if they do, they feel some connection already, as far as like being able to pray, or they've prayed about different things in life, or I think everyone in the world at this point, especially throughout COVID, has said some form of a prayer. Like, God, protect me from that thing. Like, but I think, on the first end, it's like, it could be meditation. Meditation could be an entryway to feeling, and it could be a form of prayer in some regards, to be meditating. I think meditation, in Hasidic culture, meditation and prayer are one thing. It's not just two separate things. Like, learning before you start prayer helps you to meditate on the right thoughts while you're praying, and so even just meditating on, positive things, godly things, good things, meditating on, thankfulness, gratitude, thinking about all the things in a person's life and how that's a gift from above, and that's a form of prayer, of connecting, and then the other aspect for the person that is open is like, I think creating a habit or time and space throughout the person's day to just be able to have a form of prayer, whatever it may be, even if it's the smallest of things. I know people that do, like, every night before they go to sleep, they might not be religious, they might not be into certain things, but every night before they go to sleep, they have this moment of gratitude and they thank God for all the things in their life. And that is a huge difference in the person. And people they have this whole movement around gratitude journals and all these things and gratitude apps. And it's because it's a whole thing. It changes a person. And there's people that show this works. This is why we created an app for people. This is why every self-help guru is telling you you have to practice gratitude, or you have to meditate. You have to be mindful, like, because it is a thing. It changes a person.
Thank you. Yeah. It sounds so basic. And then I think some of the most basic things like prayer elude people the most. So I appreciate you breaking it down. So is there anything in the last couple minutes that you want to add or talk about, or, share what you have coming up? And also, of course, let people know where they can find you and follow along with what you're up to.
I don't know if anything specific comes to mind. There's always so many things, but I would say that you can definitely follow me where I primarily reside on social media, which is Instagram at Moshe Reuven. And if you just type in Moshe and then try to figure out the rest, if you can't spell all these things, then I'm sure you'll figure it out, or Google me or whatever, and you'll find me. Or text Madison or DM Madison for my hat. And I think that's the best way to keep up with me. I'm always trying to do, there's going to be tons of different things that I could tell you guys about, but I'd rather, you guys be connected with the journey first and foremost, and hopefully you'll find different things that you like and connect to personally that we could keep connected through. And always feel free to reach out to me, all of you. And, I try to be as accessible as I can be. And yeah, this is an awesome podcast. It's very interesting to talk about these things with you.
Yeah, thanks for being open to it. I think about this day and night all the time. So just finding people to riff with me, I think, is what it's about. So thanks again for coming on, and see everybody or hear everybody next time.
Yeah, see you guys.